But it wasn't always like that. Now, having one of the densest populations of great whites in the world, Cape Cod's shark population was once nearly decimated. Their primary prey species was nearly wiped out. Gray seals were seen as a threat to commercial fishermen. They were in direct competition with one another, and so bounties were placed on their heads. As a result, between 1888 and 1962, there were thought to have been more than 130,000 gray seals killed. This caused a plunge in the great white shark population at Cape Cod. Since then, hunting seals has been banned and great white sharks are under protection. So, what could have happened to Koala? When he was found on Tuesday, October 15, 2024, Koala was quite a sight on Nauset Beach in Orleans, Cape Cod. John Chisholm with the New England Aquarium and Greg Skomel with the Massachusetts Marine Fisheries were two of the first people on the scene. But what they saw was puzzling. They had been called to washed-up carcasses before, sometimes those of sharks, and sometimes those of cetaceans. But this one struck them as odd. The shark was completely intact. There was hardly a scratch on him. When they measured him, he was an impressive 12.5 feet and weighed 1,240 pounds. He had been known to researchers at the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy since 2022, but had only been tagged the month before. There are a number of reasons why one of the Earth's most formidable predators could wash ashore dead. When they were first called, John and Greg initially thought that it could have been a case of finning, whereby the fins are removed from sharks to be made into soup. Then, helpless and unable to swim, they are left to drown. Despite a rise in restrictions on shark fishing, 80 million sharks are killed for their fins globally, and despite conservation efforts, they are still under threat, which puts a huge strain on the entire marine ecosystem. But Koala's fins were all still intact. He had not been finned. It was time to look for other signs of foul play. Although there appeared to be no major external damage to the shark, there were blood stains around his mouth. Some suggested that this could have been a sign of internal bleeding. But what could have caused that? If the shark had been hooked, then it would have been a criminal investigation. Great whites are a protected species in the U.S., and deliberately catching them is illegal. Often when they are hooked, they bleed to death if vital organs or blood vessels have been pierced. Other times, post-capture mortality occurs particularly in less robust species like blacktip and spinner sharks due to physical trauma and the stress of handling. But upon inspection, John and Greg found no sign of it having been hooked. Its skin was intact, and despite bloodstains around the mouth, it did not appear to have bled to death. But there was a bite mark on its side. Could the great white have been attacked by another shark? John and Greg didn't think so. It was a small...
You're not a child, you're a man. So stop wearing so many layers to go outside and get the bear stuff.
Likely made by a much smaller shark after Koala had already died. It was superficial at best and wouldn't have caused a significant amount of damage if the shark had been alive at the time of the bite. Even so, the team took a swab of it and sent it off for analysis to determine the species it belonged to. The mystery continued. It was time for a closer inspection. The experts called in local Dennis Reed, who owned and operated a haulage company. 7 people helped to roll the enormous shark onto its front in preparation for its final journey. Using Dennis's vehicle, they were able to winch the shark onto the back of the trailer and transport it to the Public Works transfer station in Orleans. Once there, Greg performed a necropsy to try and find out why the shark died. But could this have simply been a case of old age? It is unlikely. Sharks often fall prey to other marine predators if they dip in performance. They become easy targets, and so rarely do sharks make it to old age. As soon as they start to slow down, their days are numbers. On top of that, the experts didn't think this shark was old. He was in his prime, an apex hunting machine that now lay lifeless on the sand. As they were trying to work out what had happened to Koala, something else washed up on the Cape Cod shoreline. It was another shark. The scientists were baffled. This time it was a porbeagle shark on Chapin Beach in Dennis, found by photographer and local resident Bob Amaral. Just like Koala, there were no obvious signs of catastrophic injury. But the body had been scavenged by coyotes, making any determination of the death more difficult. This one was not sent for a necropsy, but it did add to the suspicion surrounding Koala. Greg carried out the necropsy on Koala. He inspected the external skin closely. The tag that had been attached only weeks before was still intact, and there were no signs of infection at the tag site. But that wasn't to say the shark hadn't died from some sort of infection. Inside, the organs were all normal, and there was no sign of internal bleeding. Greg didn't gain any answers from the necropsy, and it proved inconclusive, but he sent off tissue samples for analysis. Hopefully, these will provide some answers in time. In Greg's experience, sharks sometimes succumb to chronic infections, but this is rare. Living in such a hostile environment, rich in all sorts of microorganisms, you would think that sharks would fall victim to any number of infections, particularly if they cut their skin. Sharks seem to have a unique microbiome associated with them, particularly on their skin. These microbes not only destroy invading fungal pathogens and protect against bacterial invasion, but are also thought to improve the healing process when sharks do damage themselves. When performing necropsies on sharks before, Greg has found meningitis in the brain, which is fatal. He took brain samples to test for this in Koala and must now wait for the results. If the results from the labs come back clear, then there is one other possible cause for Koala's death. The shark could have beached itself and suffocated. Whilst hunting in shallow waters, great whites and many other species of shark are at their most vulnerable. The ever-changing locations of various sandbars and sandbanks makes navigation close to shore unpredictable. With an outgoing tide, sharks can easily get stuck on the sea floor, unable to move and free themselves. Great whites can only survive for minutes out of water before the lethal effects take hold. As they thrash and flap about, trying to get back into deeper water, they expend more oxygen. While some oxygen exchange can take place with wet gills, this is only minimal, and as the gills dry out, the tiny villi clump together, which render the gills ineffective if they do manage to get back into the water. A lack of oxygen doesn't just cause the shark to suffocate, but it causes brain damage so that even if the shark survives the stranding, its life may be severely shortened. Aside from suffocating when out of the water, sharks also suffer another fate. Their bodies are not designed to cope with the effects of gravity on land. They are cartilaginous fish with no solid skeleton made from bone, which helps with their buoyancy in the water. But if on land, this cartilage cannot support their immense weight. Their internal organs slowly become crushed under their own weight, and even if they do manage to make